Between 1920 and 1933, there was a nationwide constitutional ban on the production, importation, and sale of alcoholic beverages throughout the United States. This period is referred to as the Prohibition era. This prohibition made the illegal sale of alcohol an insanely lucrative business for criminal gangs, which were constantly at each other's throats and engaged in bloody gang wars over the control of territories. The most notorious of these gangs was the Chicago Outfit, under the leadership of a 26-year-old who ran the most flourishing racketeering and bootlegging operations in the country and rose to become one of the most ruthless gangsters in United States history. In this episode, we narrate the life and atrocities of Al Capone, the man who controlled the Chicago underworld during the golden age of organized crime. Al Capone was born Alphonse Gabriel Capone on January 17, 1899, in New York to Italian immigrant parents. His father, Gabriel Capone, was a barber, and his mother, Teresa Raiola, was a seamstress. Al had 8 siblings, 2 of whom worked with him in his criminal empire. From his school days, Capone had trouble obeying rules. His schooling ended at age 14 after he was expelled for hitting a female teacher in the face. For 2 years, Capone did odd jobs around Brooklyn. At 16, he started working as a bouncer in organized crime premises, such as brothels and gambling houses. During this time, Capone made acquaintances with the biggest players in organized crime, including Johnny Torrio, the leader of the most prominent Italian crime syndicate in Chicago. Capone started dating May Josephine Coughlin, an Irish Catholic woman who gave birth to their son, Sonny Capone, 3 weeks before their wedding in December 1918. At the time of their union, Capone was only 19 and needed parental consent, while May had already reached maturity age, 21. May never got involved in Capone's criminal activities, and the two had a happy marriage. While working as a bouncer in organized crime premises, Capone became involved with the Junior 40 Thieves, a gang of petty thieves composed mainly of Irish immigrants and Irish Americans. He later joined the powerful 5 Points Gang, a notorious criminal gang of mainly Italian immigrants and Italian Americans who terrorized the 5 Points neighborhood of Manhattan in the late 19th and early 20th century. In 1917, while working as a bouncer in a Coney Island brothel known as the Harvard Inn, Capone tried to compliment a fellow thug's sister, Lena Galluccio, but inadvertently went too far, saying, "You got a nice ass, honey." In reaction, Lena's brother, Frank Galluccio, grabbed a knife and slashed Capone 3 times on the left side of his face. This resulted in lifelong scars that earned Capone the nickname Scarface. While working as a bouncer in brothels, gambling houses, and dance halls in New York, Capone became friends with Johnny Torrio, leader of the biggest crime syndicate in Chicago, known as the Chicago Outfit. In 1919, Torrio invited 20-year-old Capone to Chicago to work as his personal bodyguard and right-hand man. While in Chicago, Capone coordinated Torrio's illegal supply of alcohol and was significantly involved in the gang wars between Torrio's Chicago Outfit and the North Side Gang, headed by Dean O'Banion. O'Banion was eventually assassinated at his flower shop on November 10, 1924, allegedly by Capone on Torrio's orders. Jaime Weiss, a Polish-American mob boss, took over leadership of the North Side Gang and prioritized getting revenge on O'Banion's killers. 2 months after O'Banion's assassination, Capone was ambushed by the North Side Gang members, but he managed to escape. 12 days after the incident, Torrio was shot while returning from a shopping trip. Immediately, Torrio recovered from his gun wounds. He retired from gangster life and fled back to his native Italy. Capone, aged 26, took over and became the new leader of the Chicago Outfit. With the help of Canadian smugglers, Capone built an extensive network of illegal alcohol distribution in the United States. When asked about his dealings with Canadian smugglers, Capone replied, "I don't even know which street Canada is on." Capone used violence to extend his network, blowing up any establishments that refused to purchase liquor from him, killing as many as 100 people during such bombings in the 1920s. Capone's intimidation tactics became so successful that some renowned corporations are reported to have used Capone threats as a marketing tactic. Capone operated with the protection of corrupt politicians and law enforcement officials, using bribery and widespread intimidation to take over city council elections. Even the mayor of Chicago, William Big Bill Thompson, allegedly received a $250,000 contribution from Capone during the 1927 mayoral race, approximately $6.5 million in present-day value. During the elections on April 10, 1928, polling stations were targeted by Capone's bomber James Belcastro in areas where Thompson's principal opponent, William Evett Dever, was thought to have support, causing the deaths of over 15 people. Another political opponent, Joe Diamond Joe Esposito, was killed in front of his house in a drive-by shooting on March 21, 1928, just 19 days before the April 10th mayoral elections. 5 days after Esposito's murder, a bomb went off at Senator Charles Deneen's residence at 457 West 61st Place. Deneen was a political ally of Esposito's. He was not at home at the time of the blast. Finally, Octavius Granady, an African-American lawyer who challenged Thompson's candidacy, was murdered on the day of the primaries by cars of gunmen, for which Belcastro and 4 policemen were convicted. Capone was responsible for the proliferation of brothels and illegal gambling houses in Chicago. He was a sharp dresser, renowned for his custom suits, cigars, gourmet foods and drinks, gorgeous female companions, and flashy jewelry. He was the patron at almost every charity event and had become a national celebrity. With the protections of corrupt politicians and law enforcement, the North Side Gang couldn't get Capone. On September 20, 1926, North Side Gang members attacked Capone headquarters at Hawthorne Inn, opening fire with machine guns at the first-floor windows. 3 weeks later, on October 11th, Jaime Weiss, the new leader of the North Side Gang, was killed in retaliation. As Capone's influence grew in the Chicago underworld, so too did his enemy numbers. Joe Aiello, another Italian-American bootlegger, allied himself with other Capone enemies, including Jack Zuta, who ran illegal gambling houses in Chicago and made several attempts to eliminate Capone in the spring of 1927. First, they offered $35,000, approximately $770,000 in today's value, to the chef of Capone's favorite restaurant, Bella Napoli Cafe, to put prussic acid in Capone's soup. The chef revealed the plot to Capone, who responded by sending his men to destroy Aiello's bakery on West Division Street with machine gun fire. On May 28, 1927, the gunman fired more than 200 bullets into the bakery, severely wounding Aiello's brother Antonio. In the summer and fall of 1927, Aiello hired several hitmen to kill Capone, but all ended up dead. Amongst the slain hitmen were Anthony Russo and Vincent Spicuzza, each of whom received $25,000, approximately $550,000 in today's value. Aiello eventually placed a $50,000 bounty on Capone's head, open to anyone who can pull the job. More than 10 professional hitmen took the job, but all ended up dead. Even Capone's ally Ralph Sheldon tried to collect the bounty, but Capone had him shot in front of a West Side hotel. In November 1927, Aiello hired Angelo Lamantia, an expert hitman from Milwaukee, with 4 other gunmen to ambush Capone at a cigar store he frequently visited. The plan was foiled when an anonymous tip led the police to raid the apartment which hosted the gunmen. All the hitmen were arrested. Lamantia later confessed to the police that Aiello had hired them to kill Capone. Aiello was arrested and taken to the South Clark Street police station. When Capone learned of the arrest, he sent about 24 gunmen to stand guard outside the South Clark Street police station and gun down Aiello upon his release. Strangely, Capone's men made no attempts to conceal their purpose there, causing photographers and reporters to rush to the area to witness Aiello's expected demise. One of Capone's gunmen, Louis Campagna, who made it into the station, whispered to Aiello, "You're dead, friend, dead. You won't get up to the end of the street still walking." Upon hearing this, Aiello pleaded for mercy, promising to sell all his possessions and leave Chicago with his family for good if they spared his life, but Campagna declined the request. Upon his release, Aiello refused to leave the police station. He was given a police escort out of the station to safety. He later disappeared with his family members from Chicago and settled in Trenton, New Jersey. The feud with Capone died down for a while. However, he returned to Chicago 3 years later and continued to plot against Capone. On October 23, 1930, while trying to board a taxi, Aiello was killed by a gunman from the 3rd floor of a building across the street. While Aiello was away, Capone's feud with the North Side Gang continued. After the death of O'Banion and his successor Jaime Weiss, the new gang leader, Vincent Drucci, was killed in a similar fashion just 6 months after Weiss's murder. Drucci's successor, Bugs Moran, made it a top priority to frustrate Capone's bootlegging operations. In the spring of 1929, a Capone consignment of expensive whiskey, which was illegally imported from Canada, was hijacked by North Side gang members on Moran's orders. Also, some months prior, Moran had ordered the killing of two of Capone's associates, Antonio Lombardo, murdered on September 7, 1928, and Pasqualino Lolordo, murdered on January 8, 1929. Capone resolved to completely eliminate the entire North Side gang. He sent a fake informant to lure Moran and his lieutenants to a warehouse on North Clark Street with the promise of a stolen shipment of whiskey. At 10:30 a.m. on St. Valentine's Day, Thursday, February 14, 1929, a Cadillac sedan pulled up in front of the garage where 7 North Side gang members had assembled to pick up the stolen whiskey. 4 gunmen, disguised in police uniforms, stepped out of the sedan and walked into the garage. The gunmen brought out the 7 gang members, placed them against a wall in the garage, and opened fire. Moran was not present. Having left his hotel apartment late, he approached the rear of the warehouse just when the men dressed in police uniforms were approaching the warehouse. So he immediately retreated and went into a nearby coffee shop. The massacre victims were Albert Kachelik, Moran's second-in-command and brother-in-law, Albert Weinshank, the gang's bookkeeper and business manager, Reinhard Schwimmer, an optician who worked for the gang, John May, the gang mechanic and driver, and 3 other members. The Valentine's Day massacre set off a public outcry to bring Capone to justice, labeling him public enemy number 1. This marked the beginning of the fall of Capone. As we conclude with the fall of Al Capone, please remember to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more videos on notorious historical outlaws. Following the St. Valentine's Day massacre, Walter Strong, publisher of the Chicago Daily News, urged his friend President Herbert Hoover for federal intervention, stating that Chicago was at the mercy of outlaws and that even the city's police and magistrates were under their control. In response, the White House ordered the Treasury and Justice Departments to develop plans for income tax prosecutions against Chicago mob bosses and deployed an elite squad of prohibition agents, headed by Eliot Ness, to specifically target Capone. These lawmen were incorruptible and were dubbed the Untouchables. The key to Capone's conviction for tax evasion was to prove his income, based on the fact that he openly led a lavish lifestyle but never filed income tax returns. Investigations started in 1930. That same year, Capone's older brother Ralph Capone was convicted and sentenced for tax evasion. To avoid prosecution, Capone's lawyer, Edward O'Hare, issued a letter stating Capone's income for various years and made a tax settlement offer, but the request was declined. Worse, the letter only provided further evidence of tax evasion against Capone. On October 17, 1931, Al Capone was convicted for tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. Capone hired a new legal team of tax experts from Washington. They tried to appeal Capone's case, but it yielded no results. In May 1932, Capone, age 33, was sent to the U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta. Upon arrival, he was diagnosed with gonorrhea and syphilis. He was also suffering the aftereffects of cocaine addiction. His prison job was to stitch soles on shoes for 8 hours a day. He was seen as a weak personality and was often bullied by other inmates to the point that his cellmate, Morris Red Rudensky, feared he would break and occasionally had to stand up for him. On June 23, 1936, Capone was stabbed by a fellow inmate, James C. Lucas, but he only suffered a minor injury. As time went by, neurosyphilis progressively eroded Capone's mental faculties, such that he spent the final years of his sentence in the prison hospital, confused and disoriented. On November 16, 1939, after spending 8 years in jail, Capone was granted parole for ill health, following his wife's petition to the court. Upon his release, he was referred to Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore for treatment of late-stage syphilis, but Hopkins refused to admit him due to his reputation. In 1942, the U.S. started a mass production of penicillin to treat syphilis, and Capone was one of the first patients to be administered the new drug. Unfortunately, it was too late to reverse the damages that the disease had done to his brain. In 1946, a Baltimore psychiatrist examined Capone and concluded that Capone had the mentality of a 12-year-old. Capone suffered a heart attack and died on January 25, 1947, at age 48. Thank you for watching, and do well to check out our next video right here.